She stood there, this woman I'd never met before today, my new daughter-in-law's mother, with her designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair, looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Well?" she announced loudly, to the wedding guests gathered around us. "I suppose some people just don't understand appropriate attire for such occasions." The room fell silent. My daughter looked away, embarrassed, not by this woman's rudeness, but by me. I felt my cheeks burn as I clutched my handbag, the same one I'd carried to every special occasion for the past 15 years. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't remind anyone that I had emptied my savings account to pay for the crystal glassware they were drinking from, the gourmet food they were eating, or the string quartet playing softly in the background. Instead, I smiled, a small, steady smile that didn't reach my eyes. And then I picked up my champagne glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Before all of this, before the whispers, the humiliation, the moment that would change everything, my life was orderly, purposeful, and centered around my family. My name is Catherine, and I raised my daughter Olivia largely on my own after her father walked out when she was just 4 years old. He left for his secretary and a new life in Arizona, leaving behind nothing but a hastily scribbled note and a stack of unpaid bills. The divorce left me with a mortgage I could barely afford, and a little girl who cried for her daddy every night. In those early days, I learned quickly that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. I had a child who needed stability, strength, and love. So I dried my eyes and got to work. I was a high school math teacher at the time, barely making enough to cover our basic expenses. So I picked up tutoring jobs on weekends, started an online math resource business during summer breaks, and took night classes to earn my administrator certification. Every extra dollar went toward maintaining our modest home, paying for Olivia's dance classes, and slowly, steadily building a college fund for her future. Olivia was a beautiful child, curious, bright-eyed, with her father's dimples and my stubbornness. Even as a little girl, she had big dreams. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to live in a castle," she'd tell me as I tucked her into bed. I never dismissed those dreams. Instead, I'd smile and say, "Then we better make sure you have the education to earn that castle, right?" She would nod solemnly, understanding even then that dreams required foundation. We had our routines that made our small world feel secure. Tuesday movie nights with popcorn on the living room floor. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like whatever she was obsessed with that month. Dinosaurs, ballet slippers, stars. And every birthday, no matter how tight money was, I made sure there was one special gift that spoke to her passions. The year she turned 10, I saved for 6 months to buy her the professional art set she coveted after discovering a talent for drawing. Our home wasn't large or fancy, but it was warm. I painted the walls myself in cheerful colors, sewed curtains from fabric remnants, and filled our small backyard with flowers and a tiny vegetable garden. I wanted Olivia to understand that beauty doesn't require wealth. It requires attention and care. Those early years were lean but love-rich. We were a team, she and I, making our way together. "Mom, look! I got an A on my science project." She'd race home, waving papers, her ponytail bouncing. I saved everything. Every report card, every crayon drawing, every certificate of achievement. I kept them in a cedar chest that had belonged to my grandmother, a tangible archive of her childhood to remind us both how far we'd come. As Olivia grew older, she maintained her brightness, but something else began to develop alongside it, an awareness of what we didn't have. The first time I noticed it was when she was 13, returning from a birthday party at a classmate's lakeside mansion. "Caroline's parents have a boat, Mom, and a pool, and a home theater," she said quietly in the car. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just observational, but it pierced me nonetheless. "Different families have different priorities," I explained. We prioritize your education and our home." She nodded, but I saw something shift in her eyes, the first hint of comparison, of longing. By high school, those comparisons had grown more frequent. Olivia was smart and popular, moving in social circles that often included the children of the town's wealthiest families. I encouraged these friendships. I never wanted my financial limitations to limit her world. But I watched as she began to absorb their values, their expectations, their definitions of success. When Olivia was accepted to Westridge University with a partial scholarship, I felt both triumph and terror. We'd done it. She had the opportunity to pursue her dreams. But the scholarship covered only tuition, not room and board, books, or living expenses. So I remortgaged our home, took a second job coordinating evening programs at the school, and dipped into my modest retirement fund. I never told Olivia about these sacrifices. I didn't want her feeling burdened or guilty. I wanted her focused solely on her future. "Mom, don't worry about me," she said as I helped her move into her dormitory freshman year. "I've got it all under control." She hugged me briefly, her attention already shifting to a group of girls down the hall. I drove home alone, the car eerily quiet without her music and chatter, and allowed myself one brief cry before drying my eyes and returning to work. After all, this separation was what I'd worked for, her independence, her chance at a bigger life. College transformed Olivia in ways I hadn't anticipated. She'd always been fashion-conscious, but now designer labels began appearing in her wardrobe. Her speech became peppered with references to exclusive restaurants, clubs, and experiences I knew we couldn't afford. During holiday breaks, she spent more time with her new friends than at home, often cutting short our traditions to attend parties in the wealthy neighborhoods across town. "You should see Caroline's family estate, Mom," she'd say, scrolling through photos on her phone. "They've invited me to stay for part of spring break. Is that okay?" I always said yes. Always encouraged her to embrace these opportunities. Always swallowed the small hurt that came with her growing distance. By junior year, Olivia's calls had become less frequent, her visits home shorter. When she did call, it was often with requests. "Mom, everyone's going to Cancun for spring break. I know it's expensive, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience." Or, "The internship in New York is unpaid, but I really need professional clothes. Could you help me out?" I never said no. I took out a personal loan. I picked up additional tutoring clients. I delayed fixing the leaking roof. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She met Nicholas during her senior year, a business major from a prominent family, with a confident smile and casually expensive clothes. The first time she brought him home, I watched him glance around our modest living room, noting the worn furniture, the outdated television, the simple decor. He was polite but reserved, answering my questions with minimal elaboration, checking his watch frequently. "Nick's family owns a chain of luxury hotels," Olivia told me after he left, her voice tinged with something like apology. "They have houses in the Hamptons and Aspen." She didn't need to finish the thought. The contrast between his world and ours hung in the air between us. Their relationship progressed quickly. Nicholas graduated and immediately stepped into a management position at his family's company. Olivia finished her degree in marketing and, through Nicholas's connections, secured a job at a prestigious advertising firm in the city. They moved in together into a sleek downtown apartment that cost more per month than I made in 6 weeks. I visited once, feeling out of place among the minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the cityscape. "It's beautiful," I said, meaning it sincerely. "You've built a wonderful life for yourself, Olivia." She smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression. "We've been thinking about upgrading to a bigger place," she replied. "This is just temporary." The engagement came 8 months later. Olivia called me on a Sunday evening, her voice breathless with excitement. "Mom, Nick proposed. At Le Cirque, with a string quartet playing our song." I congratulated her, asked to see the ring over video chat, and listened as she described the 7-carat diamond as if I would understand the significance of its clarity and cut. "Have you thought about a date?" I asked, already beginning to calculate what I could afford to contribute. There was the emergency fund, what remained of my retirement account, perhaps a loan against the house equity. "We're thinking next June," she said. "Something elegant but intimate. Nick's mother knows the perfect venue." She hesitated, then added, "It's a bit exclusive, but she's pulled some strings." The next day, Olivia texted me a link to the venue, an historic mansion with manicured gardens, marble fountains, and a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests. At the bottom was the rental fee, $45,000 for a Saturday in June, not including catering, flowers, or any other services. My stomach dropped, but I took a deep breath and called her. "Honey, this is beautiful, but I need to be honest about what I can contribute financially." I had planned and practiced this conversation, determined to be transparent about my limitations. Before I could continue, Olivia interrupted. "Oh, Mom, don't worry about that right now. Nick's parents want to meet with us this weekend to discuss everything. I'm sure it will all work out." Her tone was dismissive, almost impatient, as if my financial concerns were an inconvenience to her excitement. That weekend, I drove 2 hours to meet Nicholas's parents at their country club. I wore my best outfit, a navy blue pantsuit I'd purchased on sale 3 years earlier for administrative interviews. I'd had it dry cleaned and pressed, added a simple pearl necklace my mother had left me, and felt reasonably confident until I walked into the club's private dining room. Evelyn and Richard Hamilton sat at a corner table, both impeccably dressed in what I would later learn were bespoke garments from designers whose names I couldn't pronounce. Evelyn's jewelry caught the light with every slight movement, and Richard's watch alone probably cost more than my annual salary. They stood as I approached, offering perfunctory handshakes. "Catherine, we've heard so much about you," Evelyn said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What a quaint pantsuit." The slight pause spoke volumes. Olivia and Nicholas arrived. Moments later, both looking like they'd stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine. My daughter kissed me on the cheek, but quickly took a seat beside Nicholas's mother. Their heads soon bent together over a tablet displaying wedding ideas. Richard cleared his throat. "We believe the wedding should reflect the standards of the families being joined," he began, his tone more appropriate for a business negotiation than a celebration. "We've reserved the Hamilton estate for the ceremony and reception. We've also secured commitments from the top caterer, florist, and photographer in the region." I nodded, listening as he outlined plans for a wedding that would cost more than my house. When there was a pause, I spoke up. "This all sounds lovely, but I want to be clear about what I can contribute." I stated the amount I had managed to save, nearly every spare dollar for the past 6 months. Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that won't even cover the flowers, dear." She turned to Olivia. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We understand your situation. We're prepared to handle the significant expenses." I felt my face flush. "I appreciate that, but traditionally, the bride's family, traditions evolve," Evelyn interrupted, "especially when circumstances require adjustment." Olivia gave me a pleading look across the table. "Mom, isn't that generous of them? Now we don't have to compromise on anything." I swallowed my pride and nodded. "Very generous, thank you." As the meal progressed, it became clear that while the Hamiltons were willing to finance the wedding, they also expected complete control. Every decision, from the table settings to the music selection, would be made according to their taste and standards. Olivia, eager to please her future in-laws, agreed enthusiastically to their every suggestion. When I ventured an opinion about the ceremony, suggesting we incorporate a reading that had been part of my own wedding, Evelyn smiled tightly. We were thinking of something more refined. The minister at our family church has a traditional service that has served Hamilton weddings for generations. By dessert, I had been effectively sidelined in the planning of my only daughter's wedding. As we were preparing to leave, Richard handed me a business card. Our wedding planner. She'll be in touch if there are any appropriate ways you can contribute. In the parking lot, I pulled Olivia aside. Honey, are you sure this is what you want? It seems like it's becoming their wedding, not yours. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the daughter I knew, uncertain, conflicted. But it vanished quickly. Mom, this is the kind of wedding I've always dreamed of. The Hamiltons can give me that. Please don't make this difficult. She glanced over at Nicholas waiting by their luxury SUV. I need to go. I'll call you this week. But she didn't call. Instead, I received carefully worded emails from the wedding planner, detailing which elements I would be permitted to assist with. I could arrange transportation for my own relatives. I could contribute to the rehearsal dinner, though Evelyn had already selected the venue and menu. I could, if I wished, handle the guest book table. As the months passed and the wedding approached, I found myself increasingly marginalized. My calls to Olivia went to voicemail. My suggestions were politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. The few times I visited the city to meet with vendors, I was treated like an obligation rather than the mother of the bride. One afternoon, during a floral consultation that Evelyn had reluctantly included me in, I overheard her speaking to the florist while Olivia was in the restroom. We're working around certain budgetary realities, she said, her voice lowered but not enough. The mother unfortunately cannot contribute meaningfully, so we're carrying the financial burden. But we want everything perfect for Olivia, despite the circumstances. I stood frozen, a sample centerpiece in my hands, as hot shame washed over me. Not because I couldn't afford a lavish wedding, but because this woman was defining my worth as a mother by the size of my bank account. Before I could respond, Olivia returned, and Evelyn's face transformed into a mask of pleasant efficiency. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and made a decision. I wouldn't fight for control of a wedding that had clearly been taken from me, but I would not be erased from my daughter's life, nor would I allow myself to be silently humiliated. I would find a way to participate that honored both Olivia and myself. The next day, I withdrew the money I had saved, modest by Hamilton standards but significant for me, and purchased fabric, thread, and beading supplies. I had learned to sew as a girl, making most of my own clothes through high school and college. Though I hadn't created anything elaborate in years, I still possessed the skills. I would make Olivia's veil by hand. For the next 2 months, every evening after work and every weekend, I devoted myself to this project. I selected a delicate silk tulle, researched traditional patterns, and began the painstaking process of creating a cathedral-length veil with hand-embroidered edges. Into the embroidery, I wove tiny, meaningful symbols: a small daisy for the flowers she had picked me as a child, a miniature book for her love of reading, a diminutive star for the nights we had spent tracking constellations in our backyard. No one but I would recognize these symbols, but they would be there, a secret history of our life together. The work was exacting and sometimes painful. My fingers cramped, my eyes strained in the evening light. But it became a meditation, a way to pour my love into something tangible when all other avenues had been blocked. As the veil took shape, so did my resolve. I would offer this gift with no expectations. If it was rejected, I would accept that outcome with grace. But I would not be diminished by Evelyn Hamilton or anyone else. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called Olivia. "I've made something for you," I said when she finally answered. "A veil. I'd like to bring it to your next fitting, if that's possible." She hesitated. "Mom, Evelyn has already ordered a designer veil from Paris. It's being custom-made to match the dress. I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady. But this is something special. Just come see it before you decide. After some negotiation, she agreed to meet me at the bridal salon before her final fitting. I arrived early, the veil carefully boxed and wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. When Olivia arrived, looking harried and accompanied by both her maid of honor and Evelyn, my heart sank. This was not the private moment I had hoped for. "Mom, we only have an hour for this fitting," Olivia said by way of greeting. "The boutique has another bride coming in after us." Evelyn glanced at the package in my hands. "What's this?" "We're not making any last-minute changes to the aesthetic. Everything has been coordinated precisely." I took a breath and turned to my daughter. "Olivia, I've made something for you. You don't have to wear it, but I'd like you to see it." The boutique owner, sensing the tension, intervened graciously. "Why don't we take a look? A bride should consider all her options." She led us to a private viewing area and helped me carefully unbox the veil. As the delicate fabric unfurled, catching the light and revealing the intricate handwork, the room fell silent. The veil was undeniably beautiful, ethereal, classic, with thousands of tiny stitches creating a pattern that seemed to float around the edges. "This is—" the boutique owner began, running her fingers along the embroidery. "This is exceptional work. Is this vintage?" "I made it," I said simply. Olivia's eyes widened. "You made this? When? How?" "Over the past 2 months, every evening after work." I gestured to the embroidered symbols. "Each of these represents a memory from your childhood. This daisy here, remember how you used to pick them for me every spring? And this star, for our backyard astronomy phases when you were 10. For a moment, I saw my daughter, my real daughter, not the polished woman who had been performing for the Hamiltons, as her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I didn't know you could do this." Before she could say more, Evelyn stepped forward. "It's certainly crafty," she said, her tone making the word sound like an insult. "But we've already invested in a designer piece that coordinates with the overall vision. Perhaps this could be used for something else." "A family display table, perhaps?" I saw Olivia's expression shift, saw her straighten her shoulders and retreat behind the mask she had perfected. "It's beautiful, Mom, really. But Evelyn's right. We've already got everything coordinated. The photographer has specific shots planned with the Paris veil." I nodded, carefully folding the veil back into its tissue paper. "Of course. It was just an offering. No pressure." I smiled at my daughter, trying to convey that I understood the position she was in, caught between worlds. The fitting proceeded as planned. I sat quietly, offering appropriate compliments as Olivia was pinned and adjusted into her designer gown. When it was over, she hugged me briefly before being whisked away to another appointment, leaving me alone with the boxed veil and an ache that had become all too familiar. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of logistics. I confirmed. Transportation for my sister and her family, who were flying in from Colorado. I purchased a dress for the occasion. Not designer, but elegant, a deep burgundy that complemented my silver-streaked dark hair. I arranged accommodations at a hotel close to the venue, though not the luxury resort where the Hamilton family and most guests would be staying. The rehearsal dinner, held at an exclusive restaurant in the city, was my first indication of how the wedding itself would unfold. I was seated at a table far from Olivia and Nicholas, with distant relatives of the Hamilton family who clearly had no idea who I was. When it came time for toasts, Richard spoke at length about Nicholas and the Hamilton legacy. Evelyn spoke about welcoming Olivia into their family. No one invited me to speak. As the evening wound down, I approached Olivia at the bar. "Everything looks beautiful, honey," I said sincerely. "Are you happy?" She smiled, a glass of champagne in hand. "Of course, it's all perfect." But there was something rehearsed in her response, something that didn't quite reach her eyes. If you need anything tomorrow, anything at all, I'm here, I said, squeezing her hand. Thanks, Mom. Oh, I should mention, the ceremony lineup has changed a little. Nick's parents will both walk him down the aisle, and then his father will escort me. The planner thought it would be more symmetrical that way. I felt as though I'd been slapped. Traditionally, I would have been escorted to my seat by an usher as the mother of the bride, given a place of honor in the front row. I see, was all I could manage. You're okay with that, right? It's just that the Hamiltons are very traditional, and since they're handling everything— She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Of course, I said, for what felt like the 100th time. Whatever makes the day perfect for you. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect June day. I dressed carefully in my hotel room, applied my makeup with extra attention, and arranged my hair in a simple but elegant twist. The ceremony wasn't until 4 p.m., but I arrived at the venue at 1 p.m., hoping to see Olivia before she was swept up in the pre-wedding preparations. The Hamilton estate was even more impressive than the website had suggested. A sprawling mansion set on 50 acres of manicured grounds, with formal gardens, a reflecting pool, and a glass-enclosed reception space overlooking the property. Staff in uniform directed arriving vendors with military precision, while the wedding planner stalked the grounds with a clipboard and Bluetooth earpiece. I found Olivia in a suite on the second floor, surrounded by bridesmaids, makeup artists, hairstylists, and photographers. Evelyn sat in a corner, surveying the activity like a general overseeing troops. When I entered, Olivia glanced up briefly. "Mom, you're early." "I wanted to see if you needed anything," I said, feeling immediately out of place in the bustling room. Evelyn stood. "Everything is well in hand, Catherine. The professionals are managing all details." She turned to a nearby assistant. "Perhaps you could show Catherine to the ceremony site. She can get settled early." I was being dismissed, quite literally sent to my seat 3 hours before the ceremony. But before I could respond, Olivia spoke up. "Actually, Mom, could you help me with something? In private?" Surprised, I followed her into an adjoining dressing room, away from the crowd. Once the door closed, she turned to me, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. "I need your help. I can't do this." "I need your help. I can't do this." My pulse quickened as I searched my daughter's face. "What is it? What's wrong?" Olivia paced the small dressing room, her wedding gown rustling with each step. "Everything. This wedding, these people, the expectations. None of it feels like me anymore." She gestured helplessly at her reflection in the mirror. "I look at myself, and I don't recognize who I've become." For a moment, I glimpsed my real daughter beneath the polished exterior, the girl who used to build blanket forts in our living room, who cried over sad books and rescued injured birds. My heart ached with recognition. "Olivia," I said gently, "if you don't want to go through with the wedding, we can leave right now. I'll handle everything." She shook her head quickly. "No, that's not it. I love Nick. I do want to marry him." She sank onto a velvet ottoman. "But this wedding has become something else entirely. It's like I'm an actress in someone else's production." I sat beside her, careful not to wrinkle her gown. "Then what can I do?" She reached for my hand, squeezing it with unexpected strength. "Would you walk me down the aisle?" "Not Richard. You. You're the one who's been there for everything. You're the one who raised me." Emotion tightened my throat as I nodded. "Of course I will, if that's what you truly want." "It is," she said firmly. "And one more thing." She stood and crossed to the closet, returning with a familiar box. "I want to wear your veil, not the Paris one." "Are you sure? What about Evelyn and the coordinated aesthetic?" A flash of the old Olivia, stubborn, determined, crossed her face. It's my wedding day. This is the one thing I'm not compromising. Arcert, I helped her secure the veil, arranging it carefully over her elaborately styled hair. The handcrafted piece transformed her, not just physically, but something deeper changed in her posture, her expression. She looked like herself again, like my daughter. Perfect, I whispered. A knock at the door interrupted our moment. Olivia, the photographer wants to start the pre-ceremony shots. Evelyn's voice, sharp with impatience. Olivia squeezed my hand one last time before opening the door. Evelyn, there's been a change of plans, she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. My mother will be walking me down the aisle, and I'm wearing the veil she made. What followed was a quiet but intense negotiation. Evelyn's objections, delivered through a frozen smile, ranged from tradition to aesthetics to the schedule. Olivia stood firm, supported by the unexpected alliance of her maid of honor and the increasingly intrigued photographer, who declared the handmade veil exquisite and much more interesting visually. I remained silent through most of this exchange, recognizing that this was Olivia's battle to fight. But I couldn't help noticing how Evelyn's gaze repeatedly returned to me, sharpening with each defeat, as if I had orchestrated this rebellion. Eventually, compromises were reached. I would walk Olivia halfway down the aisle, where Richard would join us for the final approach, a symbolism of families uniting that the wedding planner declared on-trend and meaningful. The veil would remain, but the Paris piece would be displayed prominently during the reception as part of the bridal journey exhibit Evelyn had commissioned. As guests began arriving and the ceremony time approached, the atmosphere in the bridal suite grew increasingly tense. Evelyn monitored everything with the intensity of a surgeon, correcting minor details and issuing instructions to staff. When she wasn't looking, Olivia and I exchanged glances that reminded me of our old silent communication from her teenage years, equal parts conspiracy and affection. 15 minutes before the ceremony, Evelyn cornered me by the window. I don't know what you said to Olivia to manipulate this situation, she said, her voice low and controlled. But these last-minute changes have disrupted months of careful planning. Olivia made her own decisions, I replied evenly. As mothers, isn't that what we want for our daughters? The confidence to know their own minds? She laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. How convenient that her own mind suddenly aligns with elevating your role. She adjusted her designer jacket, studded with what appeared to be actual gemstones. Let's be clear, this changes nothing about your position. You're still the economically disadvantaged mother who couldn't provide a proper wedding for her. Daughter, my family is still rescuing this situation. This little performance doesn't change reality. Before I could respond, the wedding planner appeared, clipboard in hand. Places, everyone! We're starting in 5 minutes. The ceremony proceeded with the polished perfection that the Hamiltons' money had guaranteed. The string quartet played flawlessly. The flowers, thousands of white blossoms imported from 3 different countries, scented the air. The officiant, a distinguished minister from the Hamiltons' church, spoke eloquently about marriage and family. And yet, walking my daughter down that petal-strewn aisle, feeling her arm linked through mine, seeing the sunlight catch in the veil I had created stitch by painstaking stitch, I experienced a quiet triumph that Evelyn, for all her wealth and influence, could not diminish. At the midpoint of the aisle, Richard waited, resplendent in his morning suit. I placed Olivia's hand in his with genuine grace. This wasn't about competition. It was about my daughter having what she wanted on her wedding day. I took my seat, in the front row, conscious of the curious glances from guests who had expected a different procession. Throughout the ceremony, I caught Nicholas looking at me with new interest, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. When Olivia and Nicholas exchanged vows, I noticed his gaze lingering on her veil. his expression softening as he repeated his promises. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour that preceded the reception, I circulated among guests, accepting congratulations with genuine warmth. Several people complimented the veil, asking where it had been purchased. Each time I explained that I had made it, I saw expressions shift from polite interest to real admiration. "You created that?" Nicholas's grandmother, a formidable-looking woman with a cane and piercing eyes, stopped me by the champagne fountain. "With your own hands?" "Yes," I said simply. "It's an old skill, but one I wanted to use for Olivia's special day." She nodded appraisingly. "Remarkable work. My mother made lace, you know. Before the family fortune. These skills get lost in prosperity." She tapped her cane thoughtfully. "Evelyn wouldn't know a needle from a nail file." I hid my smile behind my champagne glass. The reception began with the grand entrance of the wedding party, followed by the couple's first dance. Everything was picture perfect, from the hand-painted dance floor to the custom lighting design that made everyone look airbrushed. I watched, from my assigned table, situated not quite in the back but certainly not with the family intimates, as Olivia and Nicholas moved across the floor to a song I didn't recognize. The dinner service commenced, 7 courses of artistic cuisine that seemed designed more for photographs than consumption. Wine pairings with each course. Crystal that sang when touched. It was objectively magnificent, if somewhat impersonal. I found myself missing the warmth of real celebration. The kind where people eat too much and laugh too loudly and dance without caring how they look. After the main course, the speeches began. Richard spoke at length about legacy and family tradition. Nicholas's best man delivered a carefully appropriate combination of humor and sentiment. Olivia's maid of honor, slightly tipsy, shared stories from their college days that made my daughter both blush and laugh genuinely. No one had asked me to speak. I hadn't expected it, given the controlled nature of the event. I was content to observe, to be present for this milestone in my daughter's life, even if my role had been minimized. But then, unexpectedly, Nicholas stood and tapped his glass. The room quieted immediately. "I'd like to say something else," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the reception hall. "Today, I gained not just a wife, but a new family member who deserves recognition." He turned toward my table. "Catherine, would you join us up here?" Surprised, I made my way to the head table as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's expression could have shattered the fine crystal. "Many of you have admired Olivia's beautiful veil today," Nicholas continued once I reached them. "What you might not know is that her mother made it by hand, spending countless hours creating something truly unique and meaningful." He smiled at me with what appeared to be genuine respect. I wanted to acknowledge that kind of dedication and love. Applause followed, seemingly sincere. Olivia hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you," in my ear. As I returned to my seat, I passed Evelyn, who was signaling frantically to the wedding planner. I caught fragments of her urgent instructions. Move up the cake cutting. Transition to dancing. Keep to the schedule. The reception continued according to the minutely planned itinerary. Professional dancers appeared during dessert, to demonstrate the choreographed routine they would lead later. A violin soloist performed during the cake cutting. Every moment was orchestrated, photographed, and managed with precision. I was at the coffee station when I overheard it, a conversation between Evelyn and one of her friends, partially hidden behind a massive floral arrangement. "Everything is exquisite, Evelyn. Worth every penny, I'm sure." The budget became practically unlimited once we saw what the alternative would be, Evelyn replied, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "You've met the mother. Can you imagine what kind of wedding we would be attending if she had been in charge? Potluck in a community center, probably." Her friend laughed. "That veil was a surprise, though. Quite beautiful, actually." "A lucky accident," Evelyn dismissed. Though I suppose when you can't afford to contribute anything meaningful to your only daughter's wedding, you have to find some way to insert yourself into the proceedings. The friend lowered her voice. So she contributed nothing financially? Nothing at all. Please. She's a school teacher from the suburbs. I doubt she has 2 nickels to rub together. No, Richard and I covered everything. Every single thing. The flowers alone cost more than her car. Something shifted inside me as I stood there, coffee cup suspended in midair. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something clearer, colder, a sudden crystallization of all the subtle indignities I had absorbed over the past months. I had spent my life being practical, responsible, measured. I had swallowed pride for Olivia's sake, accepted marginalization, smiled through condescension. I had told myself it wasn't about me, that my feelings didn't matter as long as my daughter was happy. But in that moment, listening to Evelyn's casual cruelty, I realized that allowing myself to be erased wasn't serving Olivia. It was enabling, a narrative that diminished not just me, but the life we had built together, the values I had tried to instill. I set down my coffee cup and walked directly to the head table, where Olivia sat listening to something Nicholas was saying. She looked up surprised by my sudden appearance. "Honey, may I borrow the microphone for a moment?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing toward Evelyn, who was making her way back across the room, expression alarmed. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Yes," I said with calm certainty. "But there's something I need to say." Nicholas, watching this exchange, reached for the microphone beside his plate and handed it to me without hesitation. "Here you go, Catherine." I took it, feeling its weight in my hand as I turned to face the reception. The room gradually quieted as guests noticed me standing there, microphone raised. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steadier than I had expected. "For those who don't know me, I'm Catherine Williams, Olivia's mother." I saw Evelyn frantically signaling to the DJ, who looked confused about whether to cut the sound. Richard was half rising from his seat, but it was too late. I had the floor. I've listened to many beautiful speeches tonight about family, tradition, and marriage. I'd like to add just a small perspective of my own. I looked around the room, making eye contact with various guests. Many of you have admired the details of this beautiful wedding, the flowers, the music, the incredible venue. I paused, allowing the room to appreciate once more the opulence surrounding us. What you may not realize is that this celebration represents 2 different kinds of love. I gestured toward Evelyn and Richard. The Hamiltons have generously shared their resources to create this spectacular event, and it is truly spectacular. I nodded appreciatively in their direction, noting with satisfaction how Evelyn froze, uncertain where I was going with this. But there's another kind of love represented here today, the kind that doesn't have a price tag or make for impressive photographs. I turned toward Olivia. It's the love that gets up at 3 a.m. when a child has a fever. The love that works 2 jobs to ensure college tuition is covered. The love that teaches resilience by example, that prioritizes dreams over designer labels. The room had grown very quiet. I could see some guests shifting uncomfortably, others leaning forward with interest. "I've heard some confusion tonight about my contribution to this wedding," I continued, my voice taking on a new strength. "Some of you may believe I contributed nothing of value. I'd like to clarify a few financial details if you'll indulge me." I reached into my clutch and withdrew a small notebook, the same one I had used to track wedding-related expenses over the past year. I may not have paid for the venue or the 7-tier cake, but here's what I did contribute. I opened to and the first page. Olivia's education, $127,000, including the loan against my retirement to cover room and board when her scholarship fell short. Her first apartment security deposit, $30,500, Professional wardrobe for job interviews, $2,800. I flipped the page. Down payment assistance for their first home together, $15,000. The entirety of my emergency fund. I looked up, meeting Evelyn's stunned gaze directly. Investments in Nicholas's first independent business venture, $10,000. I believe in my son-in-law's potential. Nicholas's head snapped up at this, his expression one of shock. Clearly, Olivia had not told him where that initial investment had come from. This veil, I continued, gesturing to Olivia's headpiece, represents over 200 hours of handwork. At standard master seamstress rates, that's approximately $9,000 of skilled labor. And I closed the notebook and returned it to my purse. I don't share these figures to embarrass anyone or to seek recognition. I share them because there's an important lesson here about value and visibility. My voice softened as I addressed the now completely silent room. We live in a world that often recognizes only certain kinds of contributions, the ones with impressive receipts attached. But some of the most valuable investments we make in each other can't be captured in a spreadsheet. I turned to face Olivia and Nicholas directly. My gift to you both isn't just financial support or handcrafted items. It's the example of showing up, day after day, year after year, with whatever resources you have available. Sometimes that's money. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's simply unfailing belief in someone's potential. Tears were streaming down Olivia's face now. Nicholas had taken her hand, his own expression solemn and attentive. The true measure of contribution to a marriage, to a family, to a life together, it isn't calculated in dollars. It's calculated in presence, in prioritizing relationship over recognition, in finding creative ways to support each other's dreams, even when resources are limited. I raised my glass. So here's my toast to you, Olivia and Nicholas. May you build a life rich in both kinds of resources. May you recognize the value in each other's contributions, whether they arrive with fanfare or in quiet, steady dedication. The room erupted in applause, tentative at first, then building to something genuine and warm. I returned the microphone to Nicholas and started back toward my seat. As I passed the Hamiltons' table, Evelyn reached out, catching my wrist. Her face was a complicated mask of emotions, embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been reluctant respect. "That was quite a performance," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I smiled at her, not unkindly. "Not a performance, Evelyn, just a long overdue introduction. I thought it was time we understood each other." Richard was watching this exchange with an odd expression. "The business investment," he said abruptly. "For Nicholas's project. That was you?" I nodded. Olivia believed in his idea. That was enough for me. He seemed about to say something more when the wedding planner appeared. Clipboard clutched, like a shield. "We're behind schedule for the parent dances," she announced, desperation evident in her voice. "We need to move things along." The wedding planner's intervention felt like a lifeline to the Hamiltons. The carefully orchestrated schedule provided an escape from the sudden shift in power dynamics. Music swelled as the dance floor was cleared, and Nicholas led his mother into their choreographed dance. I returned to my table, feeling oddly light, as if speaking my truth had physically unburdened me. Several guests nodded or smiled as I passed, their expressions ranging from admiration to a newfound curiosity. I had been invisible to most of them until now. Suddenly, I was someone worth noticing. When the mother-son dance concluded, the DJ announced, "And now, Nicholas and Olivia invite Catherine to the dance floor for the mother-daughter dance." This was unexpected. According to the schedule I'd been given, Olivia and Richard would share this dance, continuing the theme of Hamilton family prominence. I looked up to see my daughter standing at the edge of the dance floor, hand extended toward me, a determined smile on her face. As I joined her, the first notes of "What a Wonderful World" filled the room, the song I used to sing to her as a lullaby when she was small. I hadn't known this was planned. "Your choice?" I asked softly as we began to move together. She nodded. Last-minute change. Some decisions don't require committee approval. We danced in a comfortable silence for a few moments, finding our rhythm together as we had so many times throughout her childhood. In our tiny kitchen, in school talent shows, in the backyard, under summer stars. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the music. "I've been lost for a while." "We all get lost sometimes," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "The important thing is finding your way back." When you spoke just now, about all you've done, all you've sacrificed, I realized how much I've taken for granted, how I let myself forget who really built the foundation I'm standing on. The dance floor seemed to shrink around us, creating an intimate space despite the hundreds of watching eyes. "You were finding your place in a new world," I said. "That's natural. But I shouldn't have let them erase you. I shouldn't have participated in it." Her eyes, so like mine, searched my face. When did I become someone who cares more about appearances than authenticity? The question wasn't accusatory. It was genuinely soul-searching. I considered my answer carefully. Growing up means trying on different versions of yourself. Sometimes we wear masks so long we forget they're not our real face. I smiled at her. "But you've always known who you are underneath. That's why you asked me to walk you down the aisle. That's why you chose to wear this veil." As the song drew to a close, Olivia hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on me." We separated to applause, and I returned to my seat, noticing that Richard was watching me with an inscrutable expression. Evelyn, meanwhile, had disappeared, attending to some crisis with the dessert presentation, according to the whispers, at nearby tables. The reception continued according to plan: the cake cutting, the bouquet toss, the choreographed group dances. I participated when appropriate, observed when not, and found myself enjoying the evening in a way I hadn't expected. There was a freedom in having spoken my piece, in no longer feeling that I needed to make myself smaller to accommodate others' narratives. During a lull in the festivities, Nicholas appeared beside my table, 2 flutes of champagne in hand. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" he asked, offering me one of the glasses. "Of course," I said, surprised but pleased. He settled into the chair beside me, loosening his tie slightly. Up close, he looked younger, less polished than the corporate image he usually projected. "I didn't know," he said after a moment. "About the business investment. Olivia told me it came from her savings." I sipped my champagne. She was protecting my privacy. I didn't want recognition for it. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Why support my venture when you had your own financial concerns?" I considered how to explain a perspective that might be entirely foreign to someone raised with his privileges. Because that's what family does. We invest in each other's dreams, not just with money, but with whatever resources we have, even when the dreamer hasn't always shown appreciation for those investments. His perception surprised me. Perhaps he was more observant than I'd given him credit for. "Especially then," I replied. "Love isn't a transaction, Nicholas. It doesn't come with a ledger of debits and credits." He nodded slowly, considering this. "My family operates differently," he said, his voice lowered despite the music. "There's always a calculation happening. What's given, what's expected in return." He twisted his new wedding band absently. "It's exhausting, honestly. This glimpse of vulnerability from my son-in-law, this admission of the burden his privilege carried, created an unexpected bridge between us." "Different families have different cultures," I said. "The challenge of marriage is creating something new from those different foundations." "I want something different for us, for Olivia and me," he said with sudden intensity. Something more like what you described in your speech? Authentic? Present. I smiled, recognizing the sincerity in his voice. Then build it, one day at a time. It won't look like either of your childhood homes, and that's exactly as it should. B. Our conversation was interrupted by the wedding planner, appearing like an anxious specter at Nicholas's elbow. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're having a situation with Mrs. Hamilton. She's indisposed. Mr. Hamilton is requesting your presence. Nicholas excused himself, leaving me once again to observe the reception from my peripheral position. From across the room, I noticed increasing activity around one of the service entrances. Staff members conferring urgently, Richard gesturing. With uncharacteristic animation, the wedding planner's clipboard tapping a nervous rhythm against her leg. The band continued playing. Guests continued dancing and drinking. But there was an undercurrent of tension now, rippling just beneath the perfect surface of the celebration. Olivia appeared beside me, slightly breathless from dancing. "What's happening over there?" she asked, noticing the same cluster of concerned faces I had been watching. "I'm not entirely sure," I replied. "Something about your mother-in-law being indisposed." She sighed, dropping into the chair Nicholas had vacated. "Probably upset about the schedule disruptions, or your speech." Her expression was a mix of apprehension and defiance. "Was I wrong to let you speak? To change things at the last minute?" I covered her hand with mine. "No decisions made from authenticity are wrong, even if they create temporary discomfort." She squeezed my fingers in response. "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between your teenage rebellion and today," I laughed. "Wisdom is just the accumulation of lessons we didn't want to learn at the time." Our moment was interrupted by Nicholas's return, his expression taut with concern. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "My mother had some kind of episode. The doctor thinks it's just anxiety and too much champagne, but they've taken her home." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disheveling it. "My father wants us to cut the reception short." Olivia stood immediately. "Of course, if she's unwell." "No," Nicholas interrupted with unexpected firmness. "This is our wedding. The guests are enjoying themselves. The band is paid until midnight." He looked between us, his decision crystallizing. "My parents' drama doesn't get to hijack this day." I recognized something important happening in this moment. My new son-in-law establishing a boundary, prioritizing his marriage over family expectations. It was a small revolution, invisible to most guests, but profound in its implications. "What can I do to help?" I asked simply. Nicholas's relief was palpable. "Could you help coordinate with the wedding planner? Keep things moving? She's completely flustered without Evelyn's micromanagement, and I need to speak with my father." "Consider it done," I replied, already standing. "Olivia, you should circulate with your friends. Enjoy your celebration. I'll handle the logistics." For the next 2 hours, I became the quiet architect of wedding salvage. I consulted with the chef about adjusting the dessert timing. I authorized the band to extend their set. I arranged for transportation for elderly guests who had been counting on the Hamiltons' private car service. I didn't command or control. I collaborated, listened, problem-solved. The wedding planner, initially skeptical of my involvement, gradually began to defer to my judgment. "You're good at this," she commented as we reviewed the revised schedule. "Very different approach from Mrs. Hamilton, but effective." "Different tools for different tasks," I replied. "Sometimes precision is needed, sometimes flexibility." As the evening progressed, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Without Evelyn's rigid oversight, the reception relaxed into something more genuine. The band played requests rather than sticking strictly to the approved playlist. Guests mingled across the carefully delineated social boundaries that had been established through strategic seating. The professional dancers abandoned their rehearsed routines to join in the spontaneous joy on the dance floor. Nicholas's father returned just before the traditional end-of-evening events. He appeared tired but composed, nodding to me with what might have been respect as I briefed him on the adjustments we'd made. "Evelyn is resting comfortably at home," he said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "The doctor gave her something to calm her nerves." "I'm glad to hear it," I replied. "Sincerely. No one wants health concerns to overshadow such a beautiful celebration." He studied me for a moment. "You're not what I expected, Catherine." "I rarely am, Richard. It's both my burden and my gift." A hint of a smile touched his austere features. "Indeed." He glanced around the reception, noting the evident enjoyment of the guests. "Things seem to be proceeding well despite our absence." "Different styles of management, equally effective in their own ways," I offered diplomatically. He straightened his already impeccable tie. "Well, I should check in with Nicholas. I appreciate your, assistance during our family emergency." As he walked away, I reflected on the strange detente we seemed to have reached. Not friendship, certainly, but a complex mutual acknowledgement. In its way, it was a more honest relationship than the polite fiction we had maintained throughout the wedding planning. The evening culminated in the traditional sparkler send-off for the bride and groom. I stood at the front of the human corridor, watching as Olivia and Nicholas ran through the tunnel of light, laughing and holding hands. Just before they reached the vintage Rolls-Royce waiting to transport them to their hotel, Olivia broke away and ran back to me, embracing me tightly. "I love you, Mom," she said fiercely. "Thank you for everything, not just today, but always." I hugged her back, memorizing the feeling of her in my arms, knowing that from this day forward, our relationship would take a new shape. "I love you too. Now go start your adventure." As the car pulled away, trailing ribbons and the traditional "just married" sign, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Joy for Olivia's happiness, pride in the woman she had become, satisfaction in having reclaimed my place in her narrative, and a bittersweet recognition of this transition in both our lives. The guests began to disperse, collecting gift bags and retrieving wraps from the coat check. I found myself standing alone near the garden entrance, watching as staff began the elaborate process of dismantling the fairy tale. "It was a beautiful wedding," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Nicholas's grandmother, the formidable woman who had admired my handmade veil. "Yes," I agreed. "Everything Olivia dreamed of." "Perhaps," she said, leaning on her cane. "But dreams change as we grow. I suspect your daughter's understanding of what matters has evolved considerably today." She fixed me with a penetrating look. "You gave her something far more valuable than crystal and roses." "What's that?" "The courage to be authentic in a world that rewards performance." She patted my arm with a gnarled hand. "Not a small gift, my dear. Not small at all." With that, she moved away, leaving me to consider her words as the last of the reception unfolded around me. I had never thought of myself as particularly brave. I had simply done what was necessary, day after day, year after year, working, saving, loving, showing up. And yet, perhaps there was a quiet courage in that consistency, in that refusal to be erased. As I prepared to leave, collecting my wrap, from the coat check, I overheard two of Olivia's friends talking nearby. "Can you believe her mom made that veil? Like, actually made it with her own hands?" "I know, right? And did you hear her speech? About how she invested in Nicholas's business and helped with their house down payment? On a teacher's salary?" Makes you think about what having it all really means, doesn't it? I mean, the Hamiltons have money, but Catherine has substance, the other friend finished. "She has substance." I smiled to myself as I slipped away, that word following me like a benediction. Substance. Not a quality that photographs well for social media. Not something that impresses at cocktail parties. But perhaps in the end, the only thing that truly matters. The night air was cool and fragrant with late spring blossoms as I walked to my car, parked in the furthest lot, assigned to auxiliary vendors and supplementary guests. My feet ached from hours in dress shoes. The emotional roller coaster of the day had left me physically exhausted but mentally alert, processing all that had transpired. As I reached my practical sedan, reliable, paid off, as familiar as an old friend, I noticed a figure leaning against the adjacent car. Richard. Hamilton straightened as I approached, his formal posture at odds with the informal setting of a darkened parking lot. "Catherine," he said, nodding in greeting. "I thought I might catch you here." I unlocked my car, curious but cautious. "Is everything all right? Evelyn feeling better?" "She'll be fine," he said dismissively. "Too much champagne, too much emotion. The doctor gave her something to help her sleep." He cleared his throat. "That's not why I wanted to speak with you." I waited, sensing that whatever he had to say required patience rather than prompting. "Your speech this evening," he began, choosing his words with evident care. "It was illuminating. I've been reflecting on it. I hope I didn't cause undue discomfort," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Some discomfort had been necessary, even intentional. "Discomfort can be instructive," he replied, surprising me. "I've built my career on understanding investments, identifying value, calculating returns, managing risk. I thought I understood what it meant to invest in family as well." He looked past me toward the venue, where the lights were being extinguished. One by one. "Evelyn and I have given our children everything money can buy. The best schools, connections, opportunities. We believed we were setting them up for success." He returned his gaze to me. "But I'm beginning to wonder if we've taught them to measure the wrong things." The vulnerability in this admission was unexpected. This titan of industry, this man who had viewed me with barely concealed condescension for months, was suddenly questioning his fundamental approach to family. "It's never too late to expand our definitions of value," I offered. "Nicholas is fortunate to have parents who care so deeply about his future." "Different kinds of caring," Richard mused. "Different approaches to securing that future." He straightened, his moment of introspection passing. "In any case, I wanted to acknowledge something when the situation with Evelyn developed this evening. You stepped in without fanfare. You preserved the celebration for Olivia and Nicholas. You acted with grace under pressure." "Any parent would do the same," I said simply. "No," he countered. "Many would have seen it as an opportunity for retribution or advantage. You saw it as a chance to serve." He extended his hand formally. "Thank you for that. It did not go unnoticed." I shook his hand, recognizing this gesture for the peace offering it represented. "We both want the same thing, Richard, for Olivia and Nicholas to be happy." "Indeed." He nodded once more, then turned to go. After a few steps, he paused. "One more thing, Catherine. That investment you made in Nicholas's business venture, it's already showing promising returns. You made a sound financial decision, not just a sentimental one." With that, he walked away, his tall figure soon disappearing into the darkness between the spotlights illuminating the parking area. I drove home with the windows down, letting the night air clear my thoughts. The day had contained more emotional territory than I had anticipated. Not just the reclaiming of my place in Olivia's life, but unexpected connections and shifting perspectives that suggested ripple effects beyond the wedding itself. My modest house welcomed me with familiar comfort. The porch light I'd left on that morning, the hanging basket of petunias gently swaying in the breeze, the wind chimes Olivia had made in 5th grade still hanging from the eave. I kicked off, my formal shoes at the door, and padded in stocking feet to the kitchen, where I made a cup of herbal tea more out of ritual than thirst. Sitting at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped Olivia with homework, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd calculated budgets and planned for her future, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, but the fulfillment of a particular chapter in my life's work. I had raised a daughter who, despite temporary detours into materialism and status-seeking, ultimately recognized authentic value. I had stood my ground with dignity when faced with dismissal and condescension. I had spoken truth without seeking revenge. And perhaps most surprisingly, I had begun building unexpected bridges with my daughter's new family, not through accommodation or self-erasure, but through the quiet strength of being fully myself. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked different somehow, not younger or more beautiful in conventional terms, but more present, more vivid. The woman looking back at me had depth in her eyes, character in the lines of her face, strength in her posture. I recognized her now in a way I hadn't for some time, not as Olivia's mother or Nicholas's mother-in-law or the Hamiltons' social inferior, but simply as Catherine. Whole and sufficient. The next morning I slept later than usual, allowing my body to recover from the previous day's tension and activity. The house was quiet around me. No schedule to meet, no crisis to manage, no appearance to maintain. I made coffee and carried it to the back porch, where my small garden was coming into its summer fullness, orderly but not regimented, abundant within its modest boundaries. My phone chimed with incoming messages. A few from colleagues who had seen social media photos from the wedding, one from my sister checking in, and then, unexpectedly, one from Olivia. It contained no text, just a photo. Olivia and Nicholas, at breakfast on their hotel balcony, still in robes, coffee cups raised in a toast. She was wearing the bracelet I had given her as her something old, a simple silver piece that had belonged to my grandmother. Nothing flashy, but carrying the weight of generations. I smiled, recognizing the significance of this unposed, unfiltered moment being shared with me before any carefully curated wedding photos hit social media. It was an invitation back into the intimate spaces of her life, offered freely rather than grudgingly permitted. As I sat enjoying the morning stillness, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Not just the wedding day drama, but the longer path of single motherhood, of sacrifices made without resentment, of showing up day after day with whatever resources I had available. There had been moments of doubt along the way, times when I wondered if I was enough, if what I could provide would ever be sufficient. Now I understood with bone-deep certainty. True value isn't measured in dollar amounts. It's calculated in presence, in steadfastness. In the courage to remain authentic even when society's metrics suggest you're coming up short. I had always known this intellectually, had tried to instill this wisdom in Olivia through both word and example. But standing up at that reception, reclaiming my narrative, refusing erasure, speaking my truth without apology, had transformed this knowledge from an abstract principle into an embodied reality. The true revelation wasn't just that I had contributed meaningfully to my daughter's life despite financial limitations. It was that those very limitations had shaped a particular kind of contribution, one built on creativity rather than convenience, on presence rather than purchasing power, on the sustainable resource of personal attention rather than the finite currency of wealth. This wasn't about superiority to the Hamiltons' approach or a rejection of material comfort. It was about expanding the definition of value to include the invisible investments that shape character and resilience. It was about honoring all the ways humans support each other's flourishing, some quantifiable on spreadsheets, others measurable only in the strength of the bonds they create. As the day brightened around me, I felt a sense of possibility that had nothing to do with wedding drama or family politics. I had stood at a crossroads, continue accommodating myself to others' narratives, or insist on the validity of my own, and had chosen the path of authenticity. That choice had ripple effects beyond what I could currently see, opening doors not just in my relationship with Olivia, but in my relationship with myself. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. The Hamiltons' influence in Olivia and Nicholas's life wouldn't diminish overnight. Old patterns don't transform in a single dramatic moment, however satisfying that might be in stories. But something fundamental had shifted, a recalibration of respect, a rebalancing of power, a recognition of different but equally valuable currencies. And that was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything. 3 weeks after the wedding, I returned to my classroom for summer session. Teaching advanced placement mathematics to motivated high schoolers had always been my sanctuary. A place where logic prevailed, where effort yielded measurable results, where my expertise was valued rather than dismissed. After the emotional intensity of the wedding, the familiar rhythm of equations and proofs felt comfortingly predictable. "Ms. Williams, is this the right approach for this calculus problem?" Elena, one of my most promising students, approached my desk during independent work time, notebook in hand. I studied her solution, noting the elegant way she'd navigated a particularly tricky integration. "This is excellent work," I told her, genuinely impressed. "You found a more efficient path than the textbook method." She beamed at the praise. "I tried thinking about it differently. Sometimes the standard approach isn't the best one, right?" "Exactly right," I agreed, struck by the unexpected parallel to my recent personal revelation. There's usually more than one valid way to reach the correct answer. The trick is recognizing which path makes the most sense for your particular situation. As Elena returned to her seat, I found myself reflecting on how this principle applied beyond mathematics. Different approaches to life's challenges could yield equally valid results. The Hamiltons' path of financial abundance had provided Olivia and Nicholas with certain advantages, while my more modest resources had cultivated different but equally valuable qualities. Neither approach was inherently superior. They were simply different routes to supporting the next generation. After class, I was gathering my materials when my phone chimed with a message from Olivia. "Can we meet for coffee this afternoon? I'm in town for a meeting and have some news to share." We arranged to meet at Rosewater Cafe, a charming spot halfway between the school and downtown, neutral territory that belonged to neither of our usual worlds. When I arrived, Olivia was already there, secured at a corner table with 2 steaming mugs waiting. "Hope you don't mind I ordered for you," she said as I sat down. "Earl Grey with a splash of milk, right?" The fact that she remembered my preference, this small detail among the thousands of things demanding her attention, warmed me more than the tea. "Perfect, thank you. How are you? How's married life treating you?" "It's good. Different than I expected, but good." She stirred her own drink, some elaborate latte with artful foam designs. "We're adjusting to post-wedding reality. The fancy china is still in boxes, and we've been eating takeout on the coffee table half the time." I smiled at this glimpse of normal, newlywed life beneath the glossy exterior the Hamiltons had cultivated. "That sounds about right. Your father and I ate spaghetti on an overturned moving box for our first married dinner." Olivia's expression softened at this mention of her father, a subject we rarely broached. "I've been thinking a lot about him lately, about what he might think of the woman I've become." "He would be incredibly proud," I said without hesitation. "You're smart, determined, accomplished, all the things he valued." "Would he, though?" she asked, surprising me with her candor. "I've been wondering if he would recognize me. If either of you raised me to be someone who cared so much about appearances, about social climbing." I considered my response carefully. "We raise our children with certain values, but we can't predict how they'll interact with the wider world as they grow. You were finding your path, trying different identities. That's normal." "But I lost myself for a while there," she admitted, tracing the rim of her mug. "I got caught up in what the Hamiltons represented: success, influence, sophistication. I started measuring everything against their standards, including you. The honesty of this statement hung between us, neither accusation nor excuse, simply truth. What changed? I asked gently. Honestly? Your speech at the reception. She met my eyes directly. Hearing you lay out everything you'd invested in my future, not just the money, which was substantial enough, but the time, the attention, the consistent showing up. It was like waking up from a dream. I suddenly saw so clearly how I'd allowed myself to be defined by external markers of success rather than internal values. That wasn't my intention, I said, though part of me recognized it had been, at least subconsciously. I just couldn't bear being erased from your narrative any longer. I needed that wake-up call, she insisted. And so did Nick, though he wouldn't admit it right away. It's changed how we're approaching our marriage, our future plans. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, setting it on the table. Between us. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet today. I opened the folder to find architectural drawings, preliminary sketches of a modest commercial space with large windows and what appeared to be classroom setups. What am I looking at? I asked, intrigued. My new business venture, she replied, a hint of her childhood excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. I'm launching an educational enrichment center focusing on STEM programs for girls and underserved students. The demographic you've been advocating for throughout your teaching career. I paged through the plans with growing amazement. Olivia, this is remarkable. But what about your position at the advertising firm? I thought you were on track for a promotion. I was, she confirmed. But after the wedding, after your speech, I couldn't stop thinking about meaningful contribution, about using my skills for something that creates genuine value. She leaned forward, her passion evident. I'm good at marketing, at creating compelling narratives. Why not use those skills to get more girls excited about mathematics and science? To help them see themselves as capable of technical careers? The synchronicity with my own life's work was striking. Where did this idea come from? Remember all those weekends I spent in your classroom while you tutored? How you converted abstract concepts into real-world applications. That approach works. I've done the market research. Parents are looking for programs that make STEM accessible and exciting, especially for demographics traditionally underrepresented in these fields. I studied the business plan included in the folder, noting the thoughtful financial projections, the detailed curriculum outlines, the strategic marketing approach. This is incredibly well developed. How long have you been working on this? Since the honeymoon, she admitted with a small laugh. Nick thought I was just journaling on the beach, but I was actually sketching out business models and curriculum frameworks. And Nicholas supports this career change, moving away from the corporate path his parents might have envisioned? Her expression turned contemplative. That's the surprising part. When I finally showed him the concept, he was immediately on board. He said something about recognizing different kinds of value and wanting our work to reflect our authentic priorities. She smiled. He might have been quoting you directly. I felt a surge of pride, not just in Olivia's initiative, but in the evidence that my words had resonated beyond the moment of confrontation, catalyzing genuine reflection. There's more, she continued, turning to the last page in the folder. I've secured initial funding from an angel investor who specifically supports women entrepreneurs in education. But I'd like you to consider coming on board as the curriculum director once you retire from teaching next year. Your experience is exactly what this venture needs. The offer caught me completely off guard. You want me to work with you? As a partner, she clarified. Your equity stake is outlined on page 12. This isn't charity or daughterly obligation. It's recognition of the value you would bring to the business. The same kind of recognition you taught me about at the wedding. I was momentarily speechless, my educator's mind already racing with possibilities for innovative teaching approaches, liberated from standardized testing constraints. I don't know what to say. You don't need to decide right now, she assured me. Take the materials, review them, consider the opportunity. We're looking at launching next spring, which aligns with your retirement timeline. As I gathered the folder, a final question occurred to me. What do the Hamiltons think about this venture? It's quite different from the corporate trajectory they might have expected. Olivia's expression was a fascinating mix of resolve and newfound diplomacy. Let's just say we're all adjusting to a new paradigm. Nick has made it clear that our life choices are ours to make. Richard has actually shown interest in the business model. He appreciates solid financial planning regardless of the industry. And Evelyn... She paused. Evelyn is learning that her influence has boundaries. The transformation in my daughter was remarkable. Not a rejection of her in-laws or their world, but a recalibration of power and autonomy within that relationship. She had found her footing without burning bridges, establishing healthy boundaries, without unnecessary conflict. I'm proud of you, I said simply. Not because you're following in my footsteps with this education focus, but because you're charting your own course with clarity and purpose. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I had a good teacher in more ways than one. As we finished our tea and prepared to part ways, Olivia mentioned casually, "By the way, Nick and I are hosting a small dinner party next weekend. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. We'd love for you to come." The invitation itself wasn't particularly remarkable. What struck me was her use of "we'd love" rather than "I'd love," suggesting that Nicholas was equally invested in including me in their social circle. "I'd be delighted," I replied. "Fair warning," she added with a hint of mischief. "The Hamiltons will be there too. Richard specifically asked if you were coming. I think he wants to discuss investment strategies with you." I raised an eyebrow. Investment strategies? With me? Apparently, your track record of identifying promising ventures with limited capital has impressed him. First Nick's startup, now my education center. He called it capital efficiency, or something equally Richard-like. We parted with a warm hug, and I watched her walk away, confident, purposeful, authentically herself in a way she hadn't been for some time. As I drove home, the folder of business plans on the passenger seat beside me, I reflected on the remarkable evolution our relationship had undergone since that moment at the wedding when I had finally refused erasure. My small act of self-respect, standing up and revealing who had really invested in Olivia's future, had rippled outward in ways I couldn't have anticipated. It had awakened my daughter to values she had temporarily set aside. It had prompted Nicholas to reconsider his own priorities. It had even caused Richard Hamilton, titan of industry, to recognize forms of capital beyond the financial. The dinner party proved to be a fascinating study in evolving family dynamics. Held in Olivia and Nicholas's apartment rather than any Hamilton-owned property, it featured a relaxed menu of Mediterranean dishes that Nicholas had apparently prepared himself, a hobby he'd developed during their honeymoon in Greece. "I never knew you cooked," I commented as he offered me a plate of homemade dolmades. "Neither did my parents," he replied with a wry smile. "It didn't fit the executive image, but I find it meditative, the process of creating something with my hands." I noticed he used the past tense, "didn't fit," suggesting he no longer felt bound by that restrictive self-concept. In this, too, I recognized the ripple effects of challenging prescribed narratives. The Hamiltons arrived precisely on time, Evelyn resplendent in designer casual wear that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She greeted me with careful civility, neither warm nor overtly hostile, but maintaining the cautious distance of someone who had been forced to reassess a previous judgment. Richard, surprisingly, seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Catherine, I've been looking forward to continuing our conversation from the wedding night. Olivia tells me you're considering joining her new educational venture." "I'm reviewing the Proposal, I confirmed. It's an impressive business model that happens to align with my teaching philosophy. Smart money follows genuine expertise, he said, sounding for all the world like he was delivering investment wisdom rather than acknowledging my professional value. But I recognized this as his way of extending respect within his particular framework of understanding. Throughout dinner, I observed the subtle recalibration happening around the table. Nicholas addressed questions to me about educational trends with genuine interest. Olivia referenced childhood memories that highlighted our shared history rather than distancing herself from it. Even Evelyn, after her second glass of wine, unbent, enough to ask about my gardening techniques when the topic of sustainable hobbies arose. "You grow your own vegetables?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was trying to imagine such an activity. "From seeds?" "Among other methods," I explained. "There's something deeply satisfying about nurturing something from its earliest stage of development, watching it strengthen and eventually bear fruit." "Like raising children," Nicholas's grandmother remarked from her place at the end of the table. She had been a last-minute addition to the guest list, apparently inviting herself when she heard I would be attending. "Or building a family legacy that extends beyond material assets." Evelyn's smile tightened, but she offered no direct contradiction to her mother-in-law's pointed observation. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in a surprising discussion with Richard about investment philosophies. "Your approach intrigues me," he admitted. "High-touch, relationship-focused capital allocation with an extended time horizon for returns. Very different from typical market strategies, but undeniably effective in certain sectors." It took me a moment to recognize that he was describing parenting in the language of finance, a translation into terms he understood professionally. "The key is patience," I offered, playing along with his framework, "and diversification of investment types. Not just financial capital, but time, attention, consistent presence. The dividends are less immediately obvious, but potentially more durable," he mused, watching Olivia and Nicholas clearing dishes together, their easy partnership evident in their synchronized movements. "That's becoming increasingly clear." After dessert, Olivia invited me to see the home office she was converting into a planning space for the educational venture. As we stepped away from the others, she closed the door behind us and exhaled deeply. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I know it couldn't have been entirely comfortable." "Actually, it was fascinating," I replied honestly. "Like watching different worlds trying to establish diplomatic relations." She laughed at that. "That's exactly what it is. We're all learning a new language, finding points of connection without erasing our differences." She gestured to a wall covered with post-it notes and curriculum ideas. "What do you think? Can you see yourself being part of this?" I studied the emerging vision for her business, the girl-centered approach, the emphasis on real-world applications, the attention to inclusive teaching methodologies. "It's aligned with everything I believe about education," I acknowledged. "And the timing with my retirement is serendipitous." "Is that a yes?" she asked, hopeful but not presumptuous. "It's a very strong maybe," I replied with a smile. "I need to think through the transition from classroom teacher to curriculum director. It's a significant shift in professional identity." She nodded, respecting my need for careful consideration. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that this venture was inspired by you, not just by your teaching methods, but by your example of creating value with whatever resources you have available." As we rejoined the group, I found myself engaged in conversation with Nicholas's grandmother, who had positioned herself near the window seat where I had settled with my coffee. "You've catalyzed quite the family revolution," she observed, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Evelyn hasn't adjusted yet, but she will. Richard is already halfway there. He respects competence above all else, and you've demonstrated that in spades." "That wasn't my intention," I demurred. "I simply reached a point where I couldn't allow myself to be erased from my daughter's narrative any longer." Intention is irrelevant. Impact is what matters. She tapped her cane for emphasis. These young people were drifting toward a life measured primarily in acquisitions and appearances. You reminded them that legacy is built on sturdier foundations. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself helping Nicholas package leftovers. In the kitchen, an unexpected moment of domestic collaboration with my new son-in-law. "I've been meaning to thank you," he said as he labeled containers with precise dates, "for the business investment last year. Olivia finally told me it came from you." "It was a solid concept," I replied simply. "And you've proven me right. With its success." He paused in his methodical food storage. "It meant more than the money, though I didn't realize it at the time. It was validation when I most needed it. Belief in my capacity to create something independent of my family's expectations." I recognized in this admission a deeper understanding of different forms of investment, how emotional capital sometimes yields returns beyond what financial support alone can generate. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can offer each other isn't material resources, but genuine belief in potential. He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm trying to bring that perspective into my work at the family company, looking beyond traditional metrics to consider the human elements of business decisions. It's not always popular with the board, but it's generating interesting results." This glimpse of Nicholas's professional evolution, influenced, however, indirectly by our wedding confrontation, underscored the expanding ripple effect of that pivotal moment. What had begun as a personal reclamation of dignity had catalyzed subtle but significant shifts across an entire family system. As I prepared to leave, gathering my purse and the folder of business materials Olivia had supplemented with additional projections, Evelyn approached me. We hadn't spoken directly all evening, maintaining a polite distance that served the overall harmony of the gathering. "Catherine," she began, her voice carefully modulated, "I wanted to mention that the educational foundation Richard and I established is always looking for innovative STEM programming. Perhaps when Olivia's venture is more established, she might consider applying for a grant." This was neither apology nor friendship. It was a business-like acknowledgement of changed circumstances, a tentative bridge between deeply different worldviews. "I'm sure she'd appreciate that opportunity when the time is right," I replied with equal neutrality. Evelyn nodded once, mission accomplished. But as she turned to go, she paused. "The veil truly was beautiful," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Exquisite workmanship." With that small acknowledgement, the closest she could come to admitting her previous misjudgment, she moved away to join Richard, who was deep in conversation with Olivia about potential commercial real estate options for the education center. Driving home that night, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from humiliation to reclamation, from invisibility to recognition. The wedding confrontation had been merely the catalyst. The real transformation had unfolded in the weeks since, as all of us recalibrated our understanding of value, contribution, and family connection. I had stood up in that moment of truth, not seeking revenge or validation, but simply refusing erasure. In doing so, I had created space not just for myself, but for a more authentic expression of all our relationships. Olivia had reconnected with her core values. Nicholas had begun challenging inherited limitations. Even the Hamiltons were grudgingly expanding their metrics for measuring worth. As I pulled into my driveway, the modest home I had maintained through decades of careful financial stewardship welcomed me with familiar comfort. I had once worried that this house, this life, would seem insufficient in comparison to the opulence the Hamiltons represented. Now I recognized it for what it truly was. Not a consolation prize or a compromise, but the physical manifestation of values I had chosen and maintained through countless daily decisions. Standing in my garden the next morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun illuminate vegetables I had planted and tended myself, I felt a profound sense of alignment. The external markers of success that had once seemed so important, The designer labels, the prestigious addresses, the social cachet, had been revealed as ephemeral compared to the lasting value of authentic contribution. This wasn't about rejecting comfort or demonizing wealth. It was about recognizing that true richness comes in many forms, that the most valuable inheritances we leave our children can't be quantified in financial statements, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply stand in our truth and refuse to be diminished. At my daughter's wedding, when her mother-in-law insulted me, I had stood up and revealed who really paid for everything. But the true revelation wasn't about money at all. It was about the currency of consistent presence, of values demonstrated rather than merely discussed, of love expressed through unwavering support rather than spectacular gestures. That revelation continued to appreciate in value with each passing day, yielding returns I could never have anticipated when I first found the courage to speak my truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.